waking up involves seeing life as it is, and of course that involves seeing the wound rather than ignoring and repressing, which is of course what the personality has done. One has to go in the other direction and see life as it is, see what is, and part of that may be the wound. So it's kind of counterintuitive to the personality, but in the world of waking up, it's a necessary kind of change of direction. Previously, I talked about how this sets you apart from the world in one way, and this is one of the ways. Instead of the part of the dream of personality is creating its own world, and this punctures that dream. It takes away what that world doesn't want to include and says, no, this includes everything. There's nothing that won't be looked at. So everybody's personality has its own kind of what I call attachment points, which is where the identification is really rooted. And this is often the wound. So what I'm coming to is the fact that the wound has to be faced in order for that disidentification to happen. And I think it's different for different people. You know, it has different taste, it has a different shape, a different feel. But there's usually some pain involved, or deep grief, or fear, deep fear. And going back to your original story when you told us about what seems to be an early memory of your wound, you know, that fear that you had has been very effectively probably locked away in the basement. And we're back to this theme of feelings and emotions. It's like, has that feeling, look how you're breathing, isn't that beautiful?
I'm just feeling that, connecting that fear in a way.
Yeah, you see how engaged the body is and involved the body is in all this. So that, when that happened to you as a toddler, there was fear and there was shock, and that all registers in the body. Now, you know, you were soothed by the presence of your brother. So that went away a bit. But the initial shock of that, the initial shock of finding oneself outside of the safety of, how can we call it, you know, the natural state, is very primal and very strong, and it goes very deep into the cells.
I'm sure that, you know, I mean, maybe this is an adult mentality putting onto it, but I'm sure I could remember them just thinking, how do we stop this baby crying? You know, that's probably what I would be thinking. And
yes, I mean, that brings up a very interesting point. What does an adult do in the presence of that? When the breakdown happened to me, I was surrounded by people. I was in a state of severe trauma, and you know, it's almost like as an adult I experienced what you had as a kid. So you could say this was a re-experience of my wound, but I was an adult. And of course adults aren't meant to do that in, you know, with a child. There's a free pass, isn't there? But as an adult, this is not...
You're not meant to feel like that.
No. If you're adapted to the word of personality, it's so alien to you that you will want to push it away, just as you want to push, it hits that pain in you and that deep fear that you want to bury, so you don't want to look at it.
In the book you say, you know, families were becoming distressed or uncomfortable. People were, you know,
really
discomforted by your pain.
Exactly, and I would say that's the reason why. It's because they're confronted with their own, subconsciously, of course they didn't know that. The doctor I saw was protected by his science, his professionalism, and so he didn't have to confront, you know, he was almost dismissive of me, and it's just a panic attack, or, you know. So this was a great defense for him. He didn't need to confront, and in a sense, you know, that's perhaps right that doctors do that. Doctors need to be in control. They don't want to be feeling their own deep pain when they're in a profession where they need to be professional and carry out their duties. So fair enough. Before I was taken to the hospital, all these families and people around were freaking out. I understand that. But there was one woman there who worked at a shop or something who came out, and she was so helpful to me. She was like an anchor because, well, first of all, I had my wife there. So thankfully, she was, it's shocking for anyone. It was shocking for her to see me like that. But there was one woman, like I say, who didn't freak out and was still able to stay in her heart. And I could feel that. There's this chaos going on. I'm in absolute trauma and chaos. But there's one person who's kind of beaming this support and concern and care. But it wasn't laced with emotion. It was actually present. She was present to it. She wasn't pushing it away and trying to shut me up. She was just caring, and I could feel that. And I can still remember it now. It was such a help to me temporarily in that moment. So obviously feeling the wound and going into those feelings is difficult, and it's not something that the world wants and the world of personality wants. But I would say in this business of waking up, how are you going to avoid it? Well, the past is, this is about the present, not the past. But in the present, the past that has been unresolved has a chance to get healed by coming up. Because if you imagine all our lives we spend pushing away emotions we don't want to feel. And I've said this before, it's like that goes. And there's a kind of, for me, in my breakdown, I didn't have the option of that. Because the equipment, the functionality of the personality that kept it down wasn't working. So I didn't have a choice. So a breakdown is perhaps a way of when the gates break open and the control goes, and it's chaos, and it's very, very difficult because it all comes at once. Now, this is the way it happened for me. This doesn't have to happen for everyone. This is a particular story that was my story. Not everybody has to go through that all at once. I know someone who's gone through the same thing, but not all at once. There's this kind of gradual, things come up and they're just as deep and powerful as I faced. But it wasn't a kind of like a whole collapse. She was still able to live a life, and there was enough grounding and energy to run her life as it was. I mean, it was pared down, but still, because this needs space. It takes space, stillness, courage, attention, so much for this to happen. And this is why it's not going to happen for most people, because the whole world is going this way. And these few fish are swimming in the other direction, not because they're special or because they've chosen it or they're greater in a way, but just because they've been really, you can only say programmed that way. If you weren't programmed the way you were, you wouldn't be sitting here listening to me.
Is it something then that you'd recommend that, tonight or over the weekend, it's Friday, I sit in contact with this pain, my wound, relive it, rewrite it, maybe even just.
You can't do this. This either happens to you or it doesn't. I mean, if there is a yearning and a willingness in you, all the unfolding that needs to happen for waking up to take place will happen.
Right.
It's like you're in a river. All you've got to do is
Keep
let
floating.
go into the current, and you will be taken into whatever you need. And all you've got to do is be willing to face whatever comes. So it's not something, the way you described it to me started to sound like doing. But
Yes.
having said that, you did say think about it and write it. Well, write it down. Well, that's what I did. It wasn't done as a practice. It was done as all hell's let loose. I'm feeling all these terrible feelings. The only thing I had left was my choiceless awareness that could observe what was going on. And by writing, I found a slight distance to it that allowed me to some part of me was able to detach from it and analyze it. And I say analyze, it's not like unlocking an equation or something. It's not. It just has to be seen for what it is, and there are patterns and there are things that can be understood as the feelings come out. Mm-hmm. I felt this because in my story this is how it was. In the end, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how you were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. In the end, the doorway You might find the doorway that you were kicked out, but in the end, the point is, are you in or out? Once you're in the Garden of Eden, it doesn't really matter how it happened that you left. But before you find your way in again, there is a kind of focus on how you left or how it was lost, because that's your way in.
Well,
that's your
there's
way back in.
Pain around there, I guess, and personality, isn't it? You know, that's, as you say, this is the root of the personality. So
the bit that the personality most wants you to run away from, and most wants you to not go to. If you ever have that feeling, you're near where you need to go. That's where the energy is. If you want to wake up. Now, if there isn't enough yearning and willingness, you may have that feeling and you may ignore it because you're not ready. And maybe that's the best thing. But if you are ready, when you start to have that feeling, there's a kind of sensor that goes off and you think, I've got to go here. There's energy here. This is my attachment point. And the impulse to follow it is stronger than the impulse from the personality to resist it.
I think I'm having something like that now, having thought of, remembered the wound or this experience and being aware of the power. There's a part of me that is saying almost like, let's go and deal with this now then. We found it, it's here. Otherwise it's just going to erupt at other times and lead to,
Yeah.
It's like, let's see if I can control this or deal with it rather than have it deal with me or control me.
So I think that's a, very worthwhile attitude to take, right? But I also say you have no control over this, really. So when I say I'm writing and I'm analysing it, it's not that I'm saying, right, I'm going to deal with this now. I had to deal with it because it was coming. So your openness to deal with it may open the door for it to be revealed to you. But beyond that, you can't make this happen. So the only thing you can have is the willingness, which it sounds like you have. This is not self-help. This is the greatest thing that any human being could find. We're talking about the wound, and I don't say any of this lightly. This is the big thing. It's not easy. It's your connection to your original life, your original state, to love. So, whilst I appreciate your intention there, in the end, you're bound down to life is all that you can do. And the willingness from this side to go into where it takes you and to want to not repress is certainly valid. So it's great that that's arising in you. But, it's all up to life. When and where and how